Lena moved quietly between the tables, carrying plates with practiced hands and a calm face. Even though her feet hurt from standing since morning. She worked at this small family restaurant every day, taking orders, smiling politely, and listening to customers complain about things that were never her fault. Most people barely noticed her. They saw only a waitress in a simple uniform. Not a young woman who once had big dreams. Not someone with a story, someone invisible. Someone forgettable that night. The restaurant was unusually noisy. A group of college boys entered, laughing loudly before they even reached their table. They were the kind of boys who believed they owned every room they walked into. The kind who treated the world like a stage and everyone else like props. Lena had served their type before. She knew their voices, their behavior, their careless jokes. As she walked toward them with a menu in her hand, one boy elbowed another and whispered loudly, "Here she comes." They all suppressed laughter, their eyes fixed on her like she was some kind of entertainment. Lena ignored the feeling in her stomach and greeted them the same way she greeted everyone, with a soft smile and calm voice. She wrote down their order while they continued whispering and giggling for no reason at all. After she walked away, she could still hear their voices. One of them laughed. "Did you see her shoes? Looks like she fought a war with them," another added. And lost, they burst into laughter as if they were comedians on stage. But the loudest of them, a tall guy named Derek, wasn't satisfied with just making jokes among his friends. He wanted a bigger show, something loud enough for the whole restaurant to witness. His eyes landed on the old upright piano sitting in the corner of the dining area. It was dusty, unplayed, and out of tune. Most nights it blended into the background, a decoration more than an instrument. Derek smirked as an idea formed in his mind when Lena returned with their drinks. Derek leaned back in his chair and raised his voice. "Hey waitress," he called out, loud enough for the nearby tables to turn their heads. Lena paused, unsure if there was a problem with their order. Derek pointed dramatically at the piano. "How about you play us something?" he said with a mocking smile. "I bet you can't even find middle C." His friends erupted into laughter. The sound was sharp, rude, and far too loud for the small restaurant. A few older customers frowned. Couples looked uncomfortable, and even the manager glanced over with confusion. But Derek didn't care. He enjoyed the attention. Enjoyed putting someone else down for fun. Lena froze for a moment, her cheeks warmed with embarrassment. She wasn't angry, just surprised. It wasn't the first time someone had teased her. But somehow this felt different. It wasn't just mean, it was cruel. It was a joke designed to humiliate her in front of strangers. One of Derek's friends added, "Come on. It'll be funny." More laughter followed. They acted like she was a clown asked to juggle. Not a person with feelings. Lena looked at the piano, her heart tightening in her chest. She hadn't touched one in years. Not since life became too heavy and dreams too expensive. The restaurant grew quieter. The nearby tables watched. Some curious, some uncomfortable. People wondered if she would run to the back to cry, or call the manager, or simply ignore them. No one expected her to walk toward the piano. No one imagined she had any connection to it. To them, she was just a tired waitress. Nothing more, but Lena stood still for a moment. Breathing slowly, she felt a mix of old memories and new humiliation pressing heavily on her chest. Derek leaned forward and added in an even louder voice, "Don't worry. We won't judge your mistakes." His tone made it clear that he expected her to embarrass herself. Lena lowered her eyes, not wanting him to see the pain he caused. But inside her, something small and quiet stirred. A part of her that had slept for years. She looked again at the piano. And instead of seeing a dusty instrument, she saw a piece of her past she once loved deeply. She didn't answer Derek. She didn't need to. The restaurant watched. Breath held as she took a slow, steady step toward the piano. Her hand reached out and brushed away a thin layer of dust, and the boys fell silent for the first time that night. None of them laughed now, none of them understood what was about to happen. But something in the air told everyone that this moment, which began as a cruel joke, was changing into something else, something unexpected. Something powerful when Lena touched the dusty piano. The restaurant saw only a waitress responding to a cruel joke. But inside her heart, something very different was happening. She wasn't just touching an instrument. She was touching a memory, one that lived quietly inside her for many years, waiting for a moment like this, long before she wore a waitress uniform, before she carried trays and cleaned tables. Lena lived a very different life. As a small child, she was full of energy, always humming melodies and tapping rhythms on every surface she found. Her mother, a gentlewoman with kind eyes, noticed her gift immediately. She saved money bit by bit to buy Lena a second-hand keyboard, even though it was old and some keys stuck. Lena loved it deeply. She would sit for hours, lost in the world of sound, creating tiny songs from her imagination. Her mother worked long shifts as a cleaner, but no matter how tired she was, she always listened to Lena play. One day, she would say, "You'll perform on a real stage." Lena believed her. She practiced with passion, fingers dancing over keys, dreams shining in her eyes. Her mother enrolled her in a small community music class, where Lena learned about chords, scales, and classical pieces. The teacher called her a natural, and Lena grew brighter each time she heard those words. But life had a way of changing without warning. When Lena turned 15, her mother fell sick. It started with fatigue, then dizziness, and soon her mother could no longer work as much as before. Medical bills began filling their mailbox. Each envelope carried numbers that felt heavier than any piano she had ever played. Lena wanted to help, so she took part-time jobs cleaning, stocking shelves, babysitting, eventually. When things worsened, she quit her music classes, telling her teacher she needed a little break, but deep inside, she knew it would be a long one. Her mother apologized again and again, tears in her eyes, but Lena always smiled and said, "Don't worry, Mom, I can play again later." She didn't want her mother to feel guilty for something she couldn't control. But quitting music hurt more than she showed. It felt like slowly letting go of a piece of herself. As time passed, her mother's condition became more serious. Their savings disappeared, and Lena took on longer shifts to cover food and medicine. Music became a luxurious something she remembered only when she heard a tune on the radio or passed by someone playing. She never complained, never blamed anyone. She loved her mother deeply, and taking care of her was worth every sacrifice. When her mother eventually passed away, Lena's world went quiet. Completely quiet, the piano, once a symbol of hope, became a reminder of what she lost. She didn't touch an instrument again. She folded her dreams into her heart and focused on surviving. She moved to the city, found a small room to rent, and got a job as a waitress at the family restaurant. Life continued, simple and silent. Her music stayed in her memories, untouched like a book no one opened anymore. And now, years later, standing in front of this dusty old piano in the restaurant, those memories rushed back like a soft wave. The boys had asked her to play as a joke, thinking she was someone with no talent, someone who would embarrass herself. They didn't know that behind her quiet smile lived a girl who once poured her heart into every note. They didn't know she had trained her fingers in small halls. They didn't know she once dreamed of concerts and bright lights. They didn't know the struggles she survived, the losses she endured, the dreams she buried. Lena took a small breath, her hand still resting on the piano lid. She wasn't thinking about Derek now, or his cruel words, or the laughter that tried to break her. She was thinking about her mother. About those warm evenings when she played while her mother closed her eyes and listened with love. She remembered the promise she made silently after her mother's funeral. "I won't forget you." Maybe this moment was not about the boys. Maybe it was about keeping that promise. The restaurant watched her in silence, wondering what she would do. Her coworkers peeked nervously from behind the counter. Unsure if they should step in, some customers felt sympathy. Others felt curiosity, but Lena felt something else, strength. The quiet kind that grows from surviving pain and losing everything but still choosing kindness. She looked at the piano again. This time not with fear, but with familiarity. Like seeing an old friend she hadn't visited in years. A friend who had waited patiently, untouched by time. She wondered if she still remembered how to play. If her fingers would find the keys as easily as they once did. Her heart beat faster, not from fear of embarrassment, but from the possibility of rediscovering the part of herself she had lost. For years, she lived as someone ordinary, unnoticed, unseen. But this piano, this simple instrument in the corner of a noisy restaurant, held the power to remind her of who she once was. Her past was calling her softly. And for the first time in a long time, Lena was ready to answer. Lena slowly lowered herself onto the piano bench, and the restaurant seemed to shrink around her. The noisy chatter faded, the clinking of glasses softened. Even the sizzling sounds from the kitchen felt distant. It was as if the whole room was holding its breath, waiting to see what this quiet waitress would do. No one expected her to sit, not after being mocked, not after being laughed at, but she did. She sat calmly, almost gracefully, like she belonged there. Her fingers hovered above the dusty keys, trembling slightly. She wasn't shaking because of the boys behind her. She wasn't afraid of embarrassment. Her hands trembled because touching the piano again awakened a deep part of her she had kept buried for too long. It was like meeting a forgotten version of herself, a younger Lena who used to live in music. Not in worry, not in long shifts or heavy silence. Derek leaned forward in his seat, the smirk on his face beginning to fade. He didn't understand why she was actually going through with it. In his mind, she was supposed to get nervous. Walk away, maybe even cry. That was the reaction he assumed she would have. His friends watched too, partly amused, partly confused. They whispered questions among themselves. Is she really going to play? Maybe she just tap a few keys. This will be hilarious, but their laughter wasn't as confident as before. Something about Lena's calm posture made them uneasy. The restaurant customers turned their chairs subtly to face her. A family paused mid-conversation. An elderly couple leaned closer. And a little boy sat up straighter, watching with wide eyes. Even the manager peeked from behind the counter, surprised to see the shy, gentle waitress sitting at the piano everyone thought was just decoration. Everyone expected something, but no one knew what. Lena closed her eyes, letting the world disappear for a moment. She remembered how she used to do this before every performance as a child. She would close her eyes, listen to her own heartbeat, and imagine her mother's encouraging smile. It was a ritual that always helped her feel connected, not to the audience, but to the music itself. And now, years later, she did the same thing instinctively. It felt right. It felt like she was finding a piece of herself again. Her fingertips lightly touched the keys. They were cold, and some were slightly uneven. But none of that mattered. She sat perfectly still for a few seconds, letting her breath steady, letting her body relax around her. The restaurant became completely silent. Even the boys quieted down without realizing why. Something about the moment felt different. Delicate, unpredictable. Derek crossed his arms, trying to pretend he didn't care, but a part of him felt strangely nervous. Something in Lena's expression didn't match the joke he planned. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked peaceful. He glanced at his friends, trying to read their faces, but they were watching her too. Curiosity replacing their earlier arrogance, Lena opened her eyes. And they held a softness mixed with determination. She wasn't thinking about entertaining these boys, nor about proving them wrong. She wasn't thinking about the customers or the attention on her. She was thinking about her mother, about the promise she made, about the love for music that never truly died inside her. This song she was about to play wasn't for the restaurant. It was for herself, and in a way, for her mother too. She pressed the first key, just one soft note, but the sound touched every corner of the room. It wasn't beautiful yet. It wasn't a melody, just a gentle, hesitant beginning. But it was enough to change the atmosphere instantly. People straightened, eyes widening, as if they had just witnessed the start of something extraordinary. The piano, though dusty and unused, responded warmly, as if welcoming her home. Her fingers moved again, pressing a second note, then a third. The beginning was quiet, almost like a whisper. Lena was testing the keys, reminding her muscles how to move, letting the sound guide her back into the familiar world of music. It was like stepping into cold water, the initial shock, then the slow adaptation, then the comfort. The restaurant remained silent, so silent that even the smallest movements sounded loud. A fork clinking against a plate made someone flinch. A chair creaked as a customer leaned forward. Derek's friend whispered something, but even he stopped mid-sentence when he heard the soft rhythm forming under Lena's hands. The boys no longer looked amused. They looked uncertain, maybe even worried, as if the joke was slipping from their control. Lena's breathing synced with the slow notes she played. She felt her nerves calm, her thoughts become clear. Her fingers began remembering the patterns they once knew so well. Muscle memory awakened, her hands starting to glide more smoothly. She wasn't playing a full piece yet, just letting the music warm her. Like stretching before a run, and yet, every sound she produced held a fragile, honest. The room leaned closer without moving, drawn in by the quiet magic forming at the piano. The joke that started this moment was gone now, almost forgotten. Something powerful was building in its place. Something none of them expected. Lena didn't look at the audience. She didn't look at the boys. She kept her focus on the keys, on the soft vibration of each note. She felt a spark inside her, faint but growing. She wasn't performing, she was awakening, and soon, very soon, the entire restaurant would hear the moment that changed everything. Lena took one long, steady breath, then let her fingers fall across the keys with more confidence. The first real chord that echoed through the restaurant wasn't loud, but it was warm, full, and unexpectedly beautiful. It rose gently into the air like a small ray of sunlight breaking through a cloudy sky. The sound didn't just fill the room, changed it. Something shifted, something quiet but powerful. A hush settled even deeper than before. As if the building itself leaned in to listen, people exchanged glances. Surprised by the rich tone coming from a piano that looked too old to sing, a few customers blinked in confusion, wondering if this was the same shy waitress who carried plates and apologized for things that weren't her fault. The little boy near the window sat up even straighter, his eyes wide. Clutching his spoon in midair as if he forgot it was there, the elderly couple looked at each other, eyebrows raised in pleasant shock. They had heard many pianists before, but something about this young woman's touch felt different, gentle yet bold, fragile yet strong. Lena didn't see any of them. Her eyes stayed half closed, her body relaxed into the music. Her fingers began moving with more purpose, each note connecting to the next like beads on a shining thread. Slowly, the melody grew clearer. A soft classical piece she used to play in her small apartment while her mother rested nearby. It was a piece filled with emotion, one that she only played on nights when she felt safe. The restaurant had no idea it was witnessing something deeply personal. The dusty piano responded with surprising grace. Its strings vibrated with passion. Grateful for the chance to be heard again after so many quiet years, it wasn't perfect. Some notes were slightly sharp, others slightly dull. But Lena's touch made even the imperfections sound beautiful. She shaped every sound with care, turning flaws into expression, turning dust into art. Derek's smirk vanished completely. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on Lena as if trying to understand how the joke he created had transformed into this. He had expected clumsy noise or confused tapping. Not this soft wave of emotion that seemed to pour straight from her heart. His friends shifted awkwardly. Unsure whether to react, they had planned to laugh. But laughter didn't fit anymore. It would have felt wrong. Disrespectful, foolish, so they sat in silence, feeling a strange pressure in their chests, a pressure they couldn't name. Lena's coworkers watched from behind the counter. One hand over her mouth in awe, the manager stood frozen, stunned by the talent he never knew she had. He always thought of Lena as hardworking, polite, humble, but never once imagined she had a gift like this. The cooks peeked out from the kitchen. Ignoring the orders waiting on the past shelf, even the sizzling grill seemed quieter. Blending into the moment instead of interrupting it, the melody grew richer, rising softly, then falling gently like waves brushing against sand. Lena played not just with her hands, but with her memories. Every note seemed to carry a story, her childhood dreams. Her mother's smile, the long nights of struggle, the quiet pain of loss, the weight of forgotten hope. She poured all of it into the instrument without meaning to, without thinking. It was simply how she played, honest and open, letting the music speak for the feelings she never said aloud. The customers felt this without understanding why. Some felt their throats tighten, others felt a warmth in their chests. Even those who knew nothing about music understood that something special was happening. Something real. It was as if she had taken all the noise, all the rudeness, all the cruelty of the world, and turned it into something soft and beautiful. The song reached its middle section, where the melody lifted slightly, becoming brighter, more hopeful. Lena's fingers danced gracefully, moving faster now, her hands flowing across the keys like water over smooth stones. She looked calm, but inside, her heart raced with emotion. She was playing again after years of silence, and every second reminded her of the love she thought she had lost forever. Derek swallowed hard, a strange feeling spreading through him. He didn't know if it was guilt or admiration or both. All he knew was that he had made a mistake, a big one. The girl he mocked, the girl he called out to embarrass, was now filling the entire room with music that felt too pure, too heartfelt for someone like him to have laughed at. The final section of her piece approached, soft and gentle, a delicate ending that felt like a whisper of goodbye. Lena slowed her hands, letting the final notes ring out with tenderness. The room stayed frozen, captivated, no one even shifting in their seats. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't performing for approval. She played because she needed to, because it healed her, because it connected her to her mother again. The song was ending, but something much bigger was just beginning. As Lena's hands moved with growing confidence, the atmosphere inside the restaurant completely transformed. What started as a place for meals and small talk had turned into something else entirely. It felt like a concert hall now, filled not with food orders and background music, but with quiet awe and emotion. The soft golden light from the ceiling lamps cast gentle shadows on her face, highlighting her calm focus. Every movement she made felt delicate, graceful, as though she and the piano were speaking a private language only a few people could understand. The customers no longer pretended to eat. Most had forgotten their meals entirely. The plates sat untouched. The drinks barely sipped. All eyes were on Lena. The rude laughter from earlier had been replaced by silence, a respectful silence, the kind found in places of worship. People weren't just watching, they were feeling something. Something they hadn't expected from a waitress in a plain apron who barely said more than a few words per shift. A woman near the door wiped a tear from her eye without even realizing it. A man who had walked in, frustrated and tired from work, now sat completely still. Mesmerized, his anger was gone, replaced by calm. A teenage girl nudged her little brother and whispered, "She's amazing," even though he hadn't blinked in 2 minutes. The music had touched them all, even if they didn't know how or why. Behind the counter, Lena's manager stood frozen. A towel in one hand, a receipt in the other. He had always thought of Lena as quiet and polite, reliable, but ordinary. Never once had he imagined she could play music like this. He felt a twist in his chest, not guilt, not shame, but something like regret. Regret that he never asked about her life outside the restaurant. That he never noticed how much more she carried behind her calm eyes. The cooks at the kitchen window were no longer yelling out orders. They had lined up to watch. Arms folded, eyes wide, some leaned forward, trying to see her fingers better, even though they had no idea what keys she was pressing. One of them muttered, "She's not just playing. She's telling a story," and no one disagreed. Derek sat slouched in his chair now. His arms were no longer crossed, his phone, once held up to record her expected failure, now sat face down on the table. He couldn't look away. But he also couldn't look proud. The arrogance had drained from his face, replaced by something unfamiliar, humility. Or maybe even shame. His friends avoided his gaze. None of them laughed anymore. Their jokes felt childish now, out of place. Small compared to the weight of Lena's music. As Lena's fingers moved into the brightest part of the melody, something remarkable happened. She smiled. Not a big smile, just a gentle, fleeting one. The kind that rises when your heart remembers joy. It was the first real smile she had shown in a long time. It wasn't for the audience. It wasn't for approval. It was for herself. It was because, for the first time in years, she felt whole again. That smile was noticed, though one by one. Customers began to lean back, not to relax, but to soak it in. They were no longer surprised that she could play. They had accepted that. Now they were being pulled deeper into the story her music was telling. The story of a girl who once loved something deeply, lost it, and was now bravely finding it again. Right in front of them, even the piano seemed to change. Its dusty wood looked warmer, its old keys alive again under her touch. Each note she played was stronger than the last, as if the instrument itself was grateful to be heard. The sound filled the corners of the restaurant like light spilling into the quiet places, melting away the judgment and noise that had filled the air earlier that evening. Lena's song didn't just fill the room, healed it. The same hands that had carried heavy trays and wiped down tables now gave the gift of peace to everyone present. The same girl they had all overlooked had become unforgettable in the span of a few minutes. She didn't demand their attention. She earned their respect by sharing something real, something beautiful, something most people hide their whole lives. As her hands slowed again, signaling the approach of the song's final part, the restaurant remained in a hush, not because they were unsure of how to react, but because they didn't want the moment to end. The waitress who once blended into the background was now the heartbeat of the room, and without saying a word, Lena had changed everything. Derek couldn't move. He sat with his arms hanging awkwardly by his sides, eyes locked on Lena as if he were watching something he didn't understand. The music kept flowing, soft and full of feeling, and each note felt like a quiet reminder of how wrong he had been. His joke, the one meant to embarrass her, to entertain his friends, now felt like a brick in his stomach. Heavy and cold, his friends looked down at their hands, at their untouched drinks, at anything but each other. One of them nervously scratched the back of his neck. Another tapped the edge of the table with shaky fingers. None of them smiled anymore. Their laughter had vanished. Not because someone had silenced them, but because the music had replaced it with something stronger. Something honest. Lena hadn't looked at them once. She hadn't tried to shame them or seek revenge. She hadn't said a single word since sitting down at the piano. And yet, they had never felt more exposed. Her music was like a mirror, not showing them her pain, but showing them their own behavior. Ugly and pointless under the weight of something beautiful. Derek tried to tell himself it didn't matter. That no one remembered he was the one who made the joke, but he knew they did. The way a woman near the counter glanced at him and looked away in disgust. The way a couple whispered behind their hands while staring. The way even the child by the window stopped clapping his spoon and simply stared at him with quiet disappointment. It wasn't anger. It was worse than anger. It was awareness. He had laughed to get attention. Now he had it, but not the kind he wanted. Behind the piano, Lena continued to play. The notes were slower now, deeper. Each one felt like a step into something sacred, a place full of old memories and long-held silence. Her hands moved softly, but with emotion that pulled at every heart in the room. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't trying to impress. She was simply telling her truth through the only language that never failed her music. Somewhere in the back, the kitchen staff had stopped working entirely. They stood in a quiet line. Hands crossed or hanging loosely, their aprons were stained. Their faces sweaty from the heat, but their eyes were calm. Fixed on Lena as if they had just discovered something rare. Like a flower blooming in the middle of a busy street. Lena's co-workers, who had always liked her but never really seen her, now watched with tears in their eyes the dishwasher. A young man with headphones always dangling around his neck whispered, "She's better than anyone on those talent shows." Another nodded. And she never even said she could play. They felt proud and ashamed and amazed all at once. The customers, too, had been changed one by one. Their walls had come down. The mother at table 4, who earlier looked tired and distracted, now held her child close as they listened together. A man who had been scrolling on his phone when she first sat down now held it quietly in his lap, forgotten. Even the oldest guest in the restaurant, a white-haired man who rarely smiled, had a tear trailing down his cheek. And still, Lena played. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with truth. Every note carried a message, not anger, not blame, but hope. Her music was not a punishment. It was a gift, one that said, "Even when the world forgets me, I remember who I am." Derek slowly stood up. Not to interrupt, not to leave, but because sitting felt impossible now. His legs felt weak, his throat was dry. He opened his mouth to say something. But the music filled the space before words could form. So he stood there, in the middle of the restaurant. Hands by his side, listening like everyone else. Humbled by the silence she had created from sound. He wanted to say sorry, but even that word felt too small now. He had come in looking for fun, but what he got was a lesson he'd never forget. He would carry this moment with him for the rest of his life, not just the embarrassment, but the beauty of it, the lesson that sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths. And Lena, without ever raising her voice, had said everything she needed to say. The final notes of Lena's piece floated gently through the restaurant. Her fingers slowed, pressing each key with care, letting every sound breathe. The melody, once soft and fragile, had grown into something powerful, something unforgettable, and now it was beginning to settle again, like the calm after a storm. No one moved, not even to blink. The silence was not awkward, it was sacred. The entire restaurant seemed frozen in time, caught between the last sound and the first breath after it. Lena's hands hovered above the piano. Trembling slightly, not from fear, but from release. She had given everything to the music. Every emotion she'd held for years, every hope, every loss. Every quiet moment when she wanted to cry but chose to smile instead. She let it all go, and now it hung in the air. Unspoken but deeply felt, she pulled her hands back gently. Resting them in her lap, she didn't look up right away. She wasn't sure what she'd see: applause, silence, judgment, or maybe nothing at all, for Lena. The moment had never been about the people watching. It had been about reclaiming a part of herself she thought was gone forever. But then it happened. One pair of hands began to clap, a single, strong sound cutting through the stillness. Then another joined in, then more, within seconds. The entire restaurant erupted into applause. Chairs scraped as people stood up, their hands coming together in loud, joyful rhythm. A wave of clapping rolled through the room. Not polite or forced, but real, honest, filled with admiration. A standing ovation for the waitress, for the girl who is supposed to be invisible. Lena's head slowly lifted, her eyes wide, lips slightly parted in shock. She looked around the room, unsure if this was real. People were smiling at her. Some were cheering softly, some whistled, a few clapped above their heads. A woman near the back even wiped her cheeks with a napkin. Her mascara smudged from tears she didn't try to hide. The applause didn't stop. It grew louder, stronger. Like the room itself was trying to say everything that words couldn't capture. It was no longer about her playing well. It was about something more, something deeper. They hadn't just witnessed a performance. They had witnessed a moment of truth, a soul rising from the shadows. Lena stood slowly, unsure of what to do. She gave a small, polite nod, then another, still stunned. The clapping only grew louder. And then, to her surprise, someone stepped forward. It was the elderly man with the gray hat. He walked slowly toward her, holding a small business card between his fingers. That, he said gently, was not just playing. That was heart. He handed her the card. I run a local music school. And if you ever want to teach or perform, please, come see me. His voice cracked at the end, full of emotion. Lena held the card in her hands like it was made of gold. She had never dreamed of receiving something like this, not here. Not after everything. More people came up to her. A woman from table 5 said, "Thank you for reminding me what music is supposed to feel like." Another man said, "I haven't cried in 10 years, but tonight I did." A little girl reached out and handed Lena a flower from the vase on her table. Whispering, "You're like magic." Even the manager approached her. His voice softer than usual. "Lena," he said, "I had no idea. If you ever want to play here again during dinner hours, we'll make it work." His eyes were glossy. His voice real. "You're not just part of the team anymore. You're the soul of this place." Derek stood in the back. Unable to step forward, his feet felt glued to the floor. He wanted to say sorry, truly and honestly. But he didn't know how. And maybe, right now, it wasn't his moment. Maybe this was a time for him to be quiet and learn. Lena looked at all the people standing around her. Faces glowing with appreciation, and for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time: pride. Not pride in herself as a worker. Not pride in surviving hard days, but pride in being herself. The version of her that loved music, the version her mother believed in. She placed her hand gently on the piano once more, silently thanking it for waiting for her all these years. And deep in her heart, she knew this was not the end of something lost. This was the beginning of something found. Lena stood by the piano as the last echoes of clapping faded into a gentle hush. Her eyes moved slowly across the room, soaking in the faces of strangers who had just become part of the most important moment of her life. Each person had come here for dinner, for conversation. For an ordinary night tan, yet they had been given something else, something they didn't expect, something unforgettable. She held the small business card in her hand, its corners warm from her fingers. The man who gave it to her had returned to his seat, but his eyes were still on her, hopeful and kind. Others waved as she glanced their way, offering nods of support, of thanks, of quiet respect. It was like a curtain had been pulled back, revealing who she truly was, not just to them, but to herself. The piano bench behind her sat slightly pushed back, tilted just like it had been when she stood up. It looked different now, no longer dusty or forgotten. It had become a symbol of courage, of truth, of the beautiful things that live inside people who are too often overlooked. She looked over toward the table where Derek and his friends sat. They were still there. But they were no longer loud, no longer laughing. Derek stared down at the table, his shoulders lowered, his hands clasped tightly together. One of his friends leaned in and whispered something. But he didn't answer. His face said everything: regret, shame, and something else too. Understanding, Lena didn't smile at him. And she didn't look away either. Her gaze was steady, peaceful. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need an apology to know her worth. The music had already spoken for her, louder than words ever could. As she turned to head back to the kitchen, something unexpected happened. A woman near the window stood up and gently called out, "Lena, will you play again sometime?" Another voice added, "Please, don't let this be the last time." Then a man said, "You changed something in this room tonight. I hope you know that." Lena stopped in her tracks, overwhelmed by the kindness spilling toward her. These were people who hadn't noticed her yesterday, who hadn't spoken more than a thank you when she refilled their drinks. Now they were cheering for her, not just because she could play, but because she had felt. And they had felt it too. The manager stepped beside her, his voice gentle. "If you want, we can put the piano back in the spotlight," he said. "We'll even clean it up. Maybe we'll do music nights. And you'll be our first guest." He smiled, not as a boss but as someone who had just rediscovered something beautiful inside his own restaurant. Lena chuckled softly, the sound delicate but full of life. "I'd like that," she replied. "I really would." Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the room like a warm note, steady and sincere. Later that night, after the rush slowed and the last table left, Lena returned to the piano once more. This time, the restaurant was quiet, dim and still. She didn't play. She just placed her hand on the keys, letting them rest there, remembering everything that had happened, remembering who she was, who she had always been. She looked up at the small photo hanging near the counter, one she had never really noticed before. It was of a smiling family who opened the restaurant years ago, building something small and meaningful. She realized now that this place wasn't just her job, it was her stage, her second chance, her new beginning. The next morning, before opening time, Lena walked into a small music store down the street. She had passed it for years without stepping inside. But this time, she did. She asked about tuning pianos, about restoring old instruments, about sheet music. The young man behind the counter asked, "Are you a teacher?" She smiled. "Not yet," she said, "but maybe soon." That night, at home, she sat on her bed and took out a notebook she hadn't touched in years. On the first page, she wrote, "Dreams don't die. They wait," and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lena didn't feel like a forgotten waitress. She felt like an artist again, like a daughter honoring her mother's love, like a soul that had been quiet for too long and was now ready to sing. The cruel joke that started it all had become something no one saw coming, a reminder that beauty, talent and strength often live where no one bothers to look. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment to bring it all back.